Hi everyone. I'm about to introduce a book that is actually 5 years old, but it's the first chance I've got to ever do a reading of it. I kind of got sick and lost my driver's license, because they wouldn't let me drive anymore, and a whole lot of other factors, mostly that I got discouraged from being sick, and I decided that I couldn't go to any readings or do anything to promote the book. And Roxanne has been more than generous with me in allowing me to keep going without really getting out and pushing this. So I'd like to do a reading tonight of 4 poems from the book that I kind of like, and I thought I'd give a little explanation to each of the poems as we go along to give you a little insight into how I came up with the premise for these poems. And also, before I start, I'd like to thank three people who were very instrumental in helping me with these poems. One was Charles Munster, and he's the one who spent a lot of time getting my poems out to publishers so that we could get enough published to make the book. And then I would like to thank I'd like to thank Raylene Duesenberg for all of her encouragement in writing this book. She gives a big help, and that's why I dedicated the book to her. And I'd also like to thank Ethan Anderson. Ethan Anderson went over some 80 poems for me, correcting my English. He is an English teacher, so he spent the time with the grammar with me, and so they were very important. And of course, number one is Roxanne, that's Roxanne Hoffman. She's the publisher of Poets Wear Prada, where the book was published. So here we go. We're going to start with the first poem. It's called Resurrection. Now, this was a poem that was written about a place where I used to trap beaver. It's a big marsh, and it's right on the side of the Kentucky River. And when I was in my 20s, I trapped there for 7 or 8 years. But I kept going back because there was a good rabbit swamp there, and I used to hunt there, hunt rabbits. But the reason for the poem was I used to go back lots of nights because New Hampshire came up with a night hunting season for coyotes, and I was able to go out and use a dying rabbit call because there were so many rabbits around, and sit in the middle of that marsh on a moonlit night and try to attract coyotes. And just looking out over the expanse, there were all of these dead trees. When the beavers build a dam, the first they eat all of the popple and all of the willow, but the trees like the fir trees and the pine trees and stuff, they rot pretty fast after the water comes up. But the deciduous trees hang on, and particularly the ash. And these ash had been there, I'd known, for 30 years, and they were still standing, and they still had most of their branches, and they used to just amaze me that they could withstand all that water being in there, like when all the other trees had gone. So that's what this poem, how this one started out. What is this bog but an expanse of white, with tufts and hummocks and dead century ash, where life follows channels entombed by ice? Years past I came with snare and axe to rob this graven march, before the sun could roll aside the weight of winter's stone and call the living forth, to mate and dam the flow. But now it's late, and snow, moon blue, gathers in my boots and cools my blood. I've come to ask the ash, how much longer need they stand? My next poem is called A Woodsman's Lament, and this is about an old buck who's just about ready to hang it up. And actually, this is the first poem I've written about this deer. Not too long ago, I posted on Facebook. I posted a poem called A Lunch to Remember, and it's actually about when I shot this deer. When I finally got to him, and found out he was a huge deer. He's one of the biggest deer I ever shot, but he must have been 10 years old. He hardly had any teeth left in his mouth, and His horns were only was a 5 pointer, and they were very spindly. But when he came charging down over the hill, hooking all the trees and everything, he looked like some young bucks just sprinting around. I was sitting under a tree not very far from a doe scrape where a doe leaves their mark for a buck to come to, and he looked every bit a warrior coming down over there. So this poem's a little bit about him and a little bit about me. If I were a buck, it's called a Woodsman's Lament, by the way. If I were a buck with velvet worn from spindled tines, muzzles gray, and teeth too poor for acorn feed, I still could scent the dark earth scrape and search for winds for extra stow. Perhaps I'd try in a suitor's duel one last clash with rut-necked youth, a chance at death in golden leaves with fair sight of love. But I am not that stalwart stag, and autumn wind blows cold. The next poem that I decided on today is another short one. I didn't want to figure I'd bore you guys too long, so. And it's called A War Between Us. And this is about me and a friend of mine that coon hunted for a long time together. We were good friends. We've kind of grown apart, but it's because we're both housebound and in a little ways away from each other. But when we were together, we hunted all the time, and we spent a lot of other things together. Our two families got together, and we played games on the weekend, and we did a lot of work on each other's places and stuff. So, and he was a Vietnam vet, and he's a little older than I was, and he was in there before, and he did his full year there, whereas I turned 18 the first year that they had the lottery, and that first year, it was 1968. They put everybody's name that was from 18 to 25 in a barrel, and then drew the birthdays, and they took the first 125 birthdays and drafted them. I was all ready to be drafted. I didn't really mind, but the thing was is my number come up like 355th, so I figured that's the only lottery I ever won. But here's the point. The war between us. We hunted coon and talked of dogs, long dead, with some the better for it. I built his barn, he fixed my truck. We pooled spare cash to pay for bats and balls and beer for our weekend softball games. He'd raise 2 pigs, I'd butcher both, one for his freezer and one for mine. It went that way, and much we did, except the past we never shared. His was mired still in Asian mud, its leeches and biting gnats, while mine was spared those times by a lottery in '69. Now the last poem I like to read is a little longer, and I wanted to include this one because Roxanne was nice enough to nominate this one for a pushcart back in 2011, and I was always very happy for that. And it's called Chores, and it's about me as a 4 or 5-year-old who was getting ready. I was 4. It says in my poem. I should have known that. And I was just starting to get chores around the house. And my first chore was to fill the wood box for the cook stove. We had a wood cook stove at the time. And the interesting thing about this poem is that it kind of melds 2 people. I had a brother who died at 4 years old. Probably, I think he was 10 years before me. And part of the animals that he didn't like are in here too. Because we talk about a goat, but I liked the goat, and he never did. But I threw it in there for his sake. And and the pig was actually my uncle's pig, which I didn't like, but I made a good ending. So that's how this poem came about. Chores. It all happened the winter I was 4. Dad allowed I'd coasted long enough. It was time I had a steady chore. He pointed to the black cook stove and said, "Boy, you keep that wood box full. That will be enough for now." Well, biscuit wood is light, so I could fill it in 2 trips from our old woodshed, but I protested just the same. I'd rather fetch the eggs, Dad. Not one to take things back. He puffed hard on his old hand-rolled cigarette. The paper burst to flame as he pinched it, coughed, and said, "You know, that's your sister's job." "Then let me milk the goats," I said, moving out of reach. He got real quiet, pushed his hat up with one hand, the other bid me come. Reluctantly, I did. He sat me on his lap, put that old hat down on my head. "So what's the matter, boy? I know how much you hate them goats." Figured I'd been had, so I might as well come clean. "Lena says there's witches in the shed." I told how she brought me there the other night and made me listen at the door, and how things inside, they were banging, clanging, all sorts of scary noise. She said they were rolling bones of little boys who pulled her sister's hair. He laughed. "I heard 'em, Dad, and they were big." "There ain't no witches, son. Them's just plain old river rats. Come in to spend the winter warm." He put me down and stood to leave. Now he'd set me straight, but I tugged his pants so he'd stoop. I could always feed the pig. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed them.